Okay, so first I just want to shout out a big thank you to Jeremy for inviting me to speak here today. It was a very humbling thing to ask me. And so I'm going to try to get us back on time a little bit, talk for the next 20 minutes. And what I'm going to share with you is my journey to becoming vegan and an activist, and also my insights and experiences as a student studying to become a qualified counsellor. And I hope to offer you, everyone here, as activists, some food for thought in terms of techniques and things that they can bear in mind when they're talking to people, non-vegans, going forward. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. I always thought I was an animal lover, and here is me as a small boy with our family cat Mac, and our two beloved family dogs, Kelly and Coco. And I remember as a small boy being with Matt, sitting under the dining room table, stroking her for hours and hours on end, whilst my mom was cooking some food or looking after my sister. I have very fond memories of those moments. And also, more recently, as a young teenager with Coco and Kelly. And I was always struck by, particularly Coco, how loving and caring she was as a small animal. She would often wait by the window at our home for hours for my parents to come home, just sitting there very vigilant and very attentive. And when they passed away, I was really, really upset, like a lot of people. These beloved pets that we hold dear to us, they're just like family members. And this is just an example of how, I thought I was an animal lover as a kid. And yet, I grew up eating animal flesh. I grew up drinking the secretions of other animals. I wore wool. I wore leather. I did all these things that I thought was normal. So I wasn't really an animal lover at that particular stage. And at the height of my ignorance, I did things like this. So this is me on holiday in Mallorca, eating some dairy ice cream, whilst Japanese fish nibbled the skin off my feet. I was in total and complete blissful ignorance in this moment. And I look back at this and I'm kind of ashamed of myself, I must confess. But I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. What I was doing was wrong. I didn't know that what these animals go through to serve me as another person, and the pain that is inflicted upon them. So what happened to me, this was in October 2016. And a year later, I had a light bulb moment. October 2017. And over the summer, I was in Pittsburgh, and I ate at the first vegan restaurant I've ever been to. And I had two chance encounters with vegans. A vegan runner called Peter, and a vegan priest called Andrew. First vegans I'd ever met. The seeds were planted through my encounters with them. And then, this guy came along. It's an old school friend of mine, Costa. And in a Skype call with him over a couple of hours one evening, he was telling me how he just adopted a vegan diet, a vegan lifestyle, and was telling me and extolling all the benefits that he felt becoming vegan. And there are words that he said to me which will always be forever ingrained in my mind, and that was, if you ingest the suffering, the flesh of an animal that suffered, you take on board that suffering. And my mind was blown. And after that conversation, I vowed to look into plant-based eating and veganism. And I watched Earthlings for the first time, and the light bulb was really, really bright at that point. And I knew at that point that I could never go back to my previous ways of eating and using animals. And for me, being vegan was a way of being that was right. Everything crystallized in my mind in that moment, my values and everything like that, and I knew this was the path that I had to follow. And within a few weeks after that, I got involved in activism. It all happened quite quickly. And I took part in my first form of street activism with Anonymous for the Voiceless at a Cube of Truth in Guildford. Anonymous Voiceless guys are just over there. And has anyone been to an Anonymous for the Voiceless Cube of Truth event before? Got a few dedicated activists over there as well. So they are essentially a form of peaceful demonstrations in which vegan activists show footage of animal exploitation around the world, and people are gently encouraged to come and watch footage, and other people speak to them, other activists speak to them if they choose to. It's a very peaceful way of promoting animal rights and veganism. And so that kind of set me on course for the next year to do more and more street activism, to attend slaughterhouse vigils, to become a trained speaker with Animal Aid. And at the same time as I was starting this journey, I also started my journey to become a trained counselor. So I was studying and also doing activism. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about some of the techniques that I've learned, which can help vegan activists and how we communicate with others. So this is just an example of a demonstration, the Cube of Truth event. So what I study as a counselor is essentially the person-centered approach, which is fundamentally it's the belief that as humans we are all capable of change, and we're all capable of growth, and it is within us. So it's the essence and the core of us, and that anyone is capable of change, capable of growth, capable of transformation if certain core conditions are in place. And when it comes to activism, speaking to people, it is my belief that these core conditions are applicable. Okay? And these core conditions are UPR, which is unconditional positive regard. It's essentially showing no judgment for a person when we speak to them. Empathy and congruence. So empathy is deep understanding, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, imagining what they're experiencing themselves. And congruence is genuineness. It's acting in harmony with your thoughts and your behaviors. And what we do is when there is congruence in a relationship, it means that people can more readily share their thoughts and their feelings with one another. And there's a more deeper connection between people. You need unconditional positive regard to have empathy, and then that leads to congruence. Basically, the three components are interconnected. So yeah, and it can be really challenging to kind of show these core conditions all the time to people, because particularly judgment. We're always going to show judgment when we speak to people, but it's quite important that even if we have that thought of judging someone, that we don't show it. So we can bracket that in our thoughts. Okay. Right. So I'm going to list now some other techniques which keep the core conditions in mind in terms of that's the platform that we're working with. And then when we're talking to people out in the street or out in the public, particularly, I'm going to use an example of street activism, for example. What techniques we can use, and active listening is a really important technique, a really important component. And when we think of active listening, it's obviously listening deeply to the person, reflecting. There's one thing that we can do, so you're reflecting back the words that they say to you in a conversation, and what that does is it helps a person understand a certain word. So for example, if someone says, "Oh, I believe in humane slaughter." Humane, what is humane? So you're getting them to kind of repeating the word back to them, you're getting them to expand on what this word is, to kind of highlight the true definition of what humane is. You can paraphrase, is another way of doing that. So putting things, when someone says something to you, putting them back in your words, and that enables a person to clarify what they actually meant, or actually expand upon what they were saying. And also working with silences. I think it's important that obviously when people see things, they may need time to absorb footage. They may need time to kind of understand what they're saying. There's a lot of thinking involved in this process. Self-disclosure is another technique. So when I say self-disclosure, I mean disclosing things about ourselves, our stories with that person. And this can relate to remembering our own meat eating, our own carnistic ways, remembering our carnism, is a powerful tool and technique that we can use, and it helps build rapport with that person, and it also minimizes how judged that person may feel in that particular moment. Essentially, what we're doing when we're actively listening to people is we're becoming an observer in their journey, in their story, and we're helping them examine their way of living. Socrates once said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." It's an important quote to remember. And also, I want to come back to this, honoring a person's process. So this relates to the core conditions, and it's basically honoring what a person is processing and the emotions that they're experiencing in this moment. And this is an example of a photo of an exchange that happened at the Cube of Truth at London Eye a few weeks ago. And you can see here there's a woman, and an activist is giving her a hug. And I was in the Cube at this point, and I observed this woman in the beige top, and she was just sobbing relentlessly for about 10 minutes, watching footage of UK farm practices, and she was visibly very shaken up by seeing this footage. And there was another activist who was trying to talk to her and give her information at this point, but I could see that this wasn't the right way to respond, because she was so shaken up and she just wanted to absorb that feeling and feel that feeling. And I think it's really important that we honor that and respect what she is going through in that particular moment, and allow her to feel that deep emotion, allow her to cry. Inevitably, emotion that is overwhelming, like anger or sadness, or that can manifest itself in an outpouring of crying, it will dissipate eventually. There will come a time where that person will be ready to speak and calm down, and then you can talk about what they're going through, talk about their feelings, and possibly offer some resources as well, so that that they feel empowered to go away and look into animal rights and veganism. But for me, I think, this is just an example of that. She was so shaken up, and I could see that she was so shaken up by seeing this, that a seed was planted for sure in her mind. And when it's also appropriate, it's okay to offer a hug to someone in that moment, to offer some reassurance, to offer some emotional support. I believe that through this exchange, that she will remember how she was supported by this activist simply by that hug. And that is quite intuitive as well. You can do that. So I'm going to move on to the broken record technique. And this is a technique that's commonly used in counselling by way of using assertion to challenge what someone is saying when they repeat things in a certain way. And how we can do this is we can be very tactful, be calm. I think a lot of people think that when you're being assertive, you're being rude, and that's not the case. We know, as activists, we know the ethical principles of veganism. We know, hopefully we've done the research and we understand these things. And when we're being assertive, we can gently challenge by means of asking open questions to that person to get them to understand, say for example, speciesism or their belief in human superiority. If they're repeating things that relate to this topic over and over again, we can ask them open questions, or we can simply state back another fact or opinion to get them to think about it. So I think commonly it does relate to, from my experience, this can relate to speciesism, because this is an ideological belief that people believe, but they don't actually know it. They're kind of conditioned to believe that we are better. So I think this can take time for people to hear the message and repeat it. So this is where I think this technique can be very useful. So this is an example of someone may say this. You could respond like this. Another way to respond. And yeah, those are just some examples of questions that I feel that people could ask. Okay, so the next one is, this is something that I've been thinking about for some time. It's actually through speaking to other experienced therapists that I've come up with this offering, and it's symbolism. So it's understanding symbolism for the person and symbolism for the victim. So I've used this example of a woman in a fur coat, and obviously this is a very triggering image. When we see people wearing fur, we're instantly triggered. It's a very visceral thing to see the skin and the fur of the flesh on another person. And we may assume things about that person in that moment. We may assume that they are selfish. We may assume that they are incredibly vain. We may assume that they know what they're doing by buying this fur product. But it's always dangerous to assume. We don't know what symbolic importance that fur jacket has for that person. Was it a gift from a family member? Was it a present, someone that was passed on from someone that died? We don't know this. So if we automatically go into an exchange with someone and we criticize them for the jacket they wear, it puts us on the back foot a little bit. So my suggestion is with this is we try to understand what symbolic value this animal product could have for that person. And we can do this by asking them questions like, how did you get that jacket? What does that jacket mean to you? And once we understand that, we can get a little bit more insight into the person's values. And then also, which I think we have to do, is put forward the case for the victim. Do you understand how, what happened in this process of this jacket, of these shoes, so forth? The symbolic value of that to the victim is that they don't have a life. And I think it's a slow process that we can do to get someone to question that and realize that in themselves. And awareness is everything when you're talking to people. So the first example I've given is deflection on the left-hand side. So you can see a woman that is looking away from someone, and that's essentially when you're distracted, maybe not willing to engage in a conversation. You guys hear me okay? Move forward a bit, okay. Okay, that's better. So, deflection. So when someone perhaps you're talking to someone and they want to change the topic, or they want to, their body language suggests that they're not as interested. I'd say work with this this response. What's going on for that person? I noticed that you were distracted when I said this. How do you feel about that? And bring it back to the conversation of why that person entered that conversation with you. What their understanding of veganism is, what their choices are, animal rights, essentially bringing that back to that particular topic. And also the other one is projection. It's very common that people could react in an angry fashion when you're talking about these issues. In counselling, it's called like a modification to contact. So when someone gets angry, they're not connecting with a deeper underlying emotion. In this situation, it's likely that it could be discomfort about animal cruelty. And it's really important that we try to stay calm, we stay curious, and we work with this emotion, and we explore that further with that person to get to the roots of it. Sometimes you may not get the opportunity to do that. Sometimes people may just walk away. That's okay sometimes. It's if they're really ready to and willing to engage and explore those feelings with you, then by all means do that. But I always think that from understanding a bit more about people and going through knowing and studying therapy, people always come back and will repeat that process in a loop. And sometimes they get tired of feeling angry or deflecting, and then we'll go back and then revisit that topic. So if they're reminded over time about veganism, they may seek to address it in the future. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you. Do you have time for questions? A couple questions if anyone wants to ask me anything. Steve. I think you really have to work with where that person is. I think it does have its place, persuasion, but it's really about knowing when that person is ready to hear that message. No, it's not about persuasion. No, that's right. That's right. So it comes down to it's a journey of self-reflection. You can help people realize things about themselves. So I think when it comes to activism, we can help people identify the conflicts that they will have, the ideological conflicts and beliefs that they will have, given to the fact that they will mostly believe that they love animals, but their actions don't suggest that. Essentially, yes. Yeah, and we can work with that and feed that. Any other questions? Okay. All right, thank you very much.